She did everything right and he still walked away, not because she was too much and not because she was not enough. Something much quieter ended the relationship, something she never even realized was happening until it was already over. Afterwards, she replayed every conversation in her mind, searching for the exact mistake, the wrong sentence, or the wrong reaction that might have changed everything. But the truth was never hidden inside one conversation. It was hidden inside a pattern most women are never taught to recognize. Here is the truth very few people ever hear. In the next few minutes, you are going to discover 6 invisible behaviors that slowly reduce a woman's value in the eyes of an avoidant partner. These are 6 behaviors that often feel like love, but are experienced as pressure. They look like devotion from the outside, but quietly activate an avoidant person's instinct to retreat. Once you understand them, you begin seeing them everywhere, in past relationships, present relationships, and perhaps even in yourself. Before we continue, I want you to do something small. If you have ever felt like you were simply too much for someone who seemed to want less of you, type the word value in the comments. Just that one word. Before this conversation ends, you will understand why that word matters much more than it first appears. There is a unique kind of grief that comes with loving an avoidant person. It is not the sharp pain of betrayal where one obvious event marks the ending. Instead, it is slow, quiet, and confusing. It feels like watching someone you care about gradually drift farther away, one small step at a time, without ever fully explaining why. You keep hoping that one honest conversation will finally make everything understandable, but that conversation rarely comes. Those unanswered questions often stay with you longer than anything else. To understand why this happens, you first need to understand how an avoidant mind usually develops. An avoidant person is not naturally cold or incapable of love. More often, they are living with an emotional survival strategy that began long before you entered their life. Somewhere during childhood, closeness became connected with discomfort or emotional danger. Perhaps a parent was emotionally available one day and distant the next, teaching a young nervous system that love could never be fully trusted. Perhaps needing someone resulted in disappointment, criticism, or emotional neglect. Over time, the mind quietly formed one protective belief without ever consciously choosing it. Closeness feels risky, while distance feels safe. That belief often continues operating quietly beneath the surface for years, influencing relationship after relationship, like an old program that was never updated. Then someone emotionally warm enters their life, someone kind, affectionate, supportive, and emotionally available. Yet instead of experiencing that love as comforting, their nervous system may experience it as overwhelming pressure, not because the love itself is unhealthy, but because their internal alarm system never learned how to recognize emotional safety. Whenever that alarm becomes activated, the oldest protective instinct begins to take over. They retreat. This explains why many deeply caring and emotionally intelligent women eventually watch an avoidant partner slowly pull away just as the relationship begins feeling truly meaningful. Their value never disappeared. The problem was never their worth. Instead, 2 different nervous systems collided, and several seemingly loving behaviors unintentionally increased emotional pressure instead of emotional safety. One of the most important lessons emotional intelligence teaches is that intention and impact are not always the same thing. You may act from genuine love while another person experiences that same behavior as overwhelming. The space between your intention and their emotional experience is where these 6 invisible patterns usually exist. They are rarely about specific words. More often, they are about timing, emotional intensity, and the rhythm of the relationship itself. The first invisible behavior is chasing him whenever he becomes quiet. This is perhaps the most common misunderstanding in relationships with avoidant partners. When he suddenly becomes distant, the silence feels overwhelming. Questions immediately begin filling your mind. Did I do something wrong? Is he losing interest? Should I reach out again? Should I explain myself? Should I ask if everything is okay? Acting from genuine care, you send another message, then another. You check in, clarify your intentions, and hope that one more conversation will bring him emotionally closer again. Yet something very different is happening inside his nervous system. For many avoidant people, emotional withdrawal is not intended as punishment. It is a form of regulation. It is how their nervous system creates enough emotional space to settle itself after experiencing more closeness than it comfortably knows how to process. Much like taking a deep breath after holding it too long, stepping back temporarily becomes their way of restoring emotional balance. When someone immediately fills that space by chasing after them, even with loving intentions, it unintentionally confirms one of their oldest fears. Their nervous system interprets closeness as something that never allows room to breathe. Instead of feeling comforted, they feel increased emotional pressure. This is what makes the situation so painful. The pursuit does not come from insecurity alone. It often comes from genuine love. You reach toward them because you care deeply. Yet an avoidant nervous system frequently interprets pursuit as emotional intensity, and emotional intensity quickly becomes associated with danger. The very effort meant to restore closeness gradually encourages greater distance. A woman who understands this dynamic responds differently. When he becomes quiet, she does not disappear in retaliation, nor does she punish him through emotional games or passive aggression. She continues living her own life. She allows space to exist without rushing to eliminate it. She understands that her value does not depend upon receiving an immediate reply. Ironically, that quiet confidence often creates the emotional safety an avoidant partner is capable of moving toward because it gives them room to return voluntarily rather than feeling emotionally cornered. Imagine two different evenings. In one version, he becomes quiet after a wonderful weekend together. She spends hours staring at her phone, repeatedly checking for messages, writing and deleting texts, and wondering what changed. By morning, she has sent several unanswered messages. In the second version, she notices exactly the same silence. She feels the same disappointment. But instead of allowing anxiety to consume her evening, she meets a friend for dinner, continues with her plans, and remains emotionally grounded. She is not pretending not to care. She simply refuses to let uncertainty control her emotional stability. Both women experienced the same situation, yet they communicated two entirely different emotional experiences to a nervous system that is constantly scanning its environment for signs of pressure. The second invisible behavior is over-explaining yourself. This one often disguises itself as honesty or emotional maturity. After feeling insecure, you explain your feelings in great detail, hoping complete understanding will create reassurance. You carefully justify your reactions, clarify your intentions before misunderstandings even occur, and try to eliminate every possible source of confusion. Your goal is understandable. You simply want him to understand you completely. However, excessive explanation often communicates something much deeper than the words themselves. It quietly suggests that your emotional stability depends upon his agreement, approval, or reassurance. An avoidant person, whose nervous system already associates emotional responsibility with heaviness, often senses this immediately, even if they cannot explain why. The more emotional responsibility they believe they are being asked to carry, the more their instinct to create distance begins activating. Real value is rarely created through endless explanation. It is created through calm certainty. A woman who genuinely trusts her own worth expresses how she feels honestly and clearly. Then she allows those feelings to stand without repeatedly defending them, justifying them, or seeking continuous validation. That quiet confidence naturally carries weight. Avoidant people are often more drawn toward emotional steadiness than emotional intensity because their own internal experience already feels unstable beneath the surface. Becoming the calm presence instead of the constant explanation often creates far greater emotional safety than the longest conversation ever could. Imagine the difference between sending a simple message that says, "I felt hurt when you left the conversation earlier," versus writing 4 long paragraphs describing every emotional detail, revisiting previous disagreements, and ending by asking whether your feelings make sense. Both messages may be completely honest. Yet the first communicates confidence and emotional stability, while the second unintentionally places your emotional well-being into someone else's hands for evaluation. One clear sentence spoken with quiet certainty almost always carries more emotional strength than pages of explanation seeking reassurance. Now, before we go any further, I want to pause for a moment because what comes next may matter more than you realize. If any part of this conversation feels familiar, if you are beginning to recognize yourself in these patterns, I want you to do 2 simple things right now while these ideas are still fresh in your mind. First, type the word value in the comments below. It lets me know you are still here, paying attention, and it also helps this conversation reach more women who may need to hear it today. Second, subscribe to the channel because the next 4 patterns we are about to discuss are often the most damaging, yet they are also the ones almost nobody talks about. You do not want to miss them. The third invisible behavior is reacting emotionally to his silence. There is an important difference between feeling your emotions and directing those emotions at someone who has emotionally withdrawn. When an avoidant person becomes distant, feeling hurt, confused, disappointed, or even angry is completely understandable. Those emotions are real, and they deserve to be acknowledged. The part that changes everything is what happens next. When those emotions become accusations, emotional outbursts, or attempts to pull him back through guilt, something begins to shift inside the relationship, and it often shifts much faster than most people realize. Many avoidant people carry a deeply rooted belief that emotions are dangerous. Long before adulthood, they learn that strong feelings often led to disappointment, conflict, rejection, or abandonment. When they experience emotional intensity during moments of withdrawal, even if that intensity is completely understandable, it quietly confirms the belief they have carried for years. Their nervous system interprets the moment as proof that emotional closeness creates emotional chaos. Instead of moving toward connection, their instinct becomes moving toward distance, because distance feels safer than emotional overwhelm. That does not mean you should hide your emotions or pretend everything is fine when it is not. Suppressing your feelings is not emotional strength. It is simply another form of abandoning yourself. Real strength comes from regulation rather than suppression. There is an enormous difference between the two. A woman who feels her emotions deeply while remaining grounded communicates something entirely different. She can honestly say, "I'm hurt," without becoming consumed by the emotion or expecting someone else to regulate it for her. She demonstrates through her own steadiness that her emotions are manageable rather than overwhelming. For an avoidant person who has spent years associating closeness with emotional instability, that kind of calm creates an unusual sense of safety. People often mistake emotional regulation for emotional coldness, but they are not the same thing. Regulation does not mean pretending not to care. It means allowing yourself to fully experience the moment while still choosing your response with intention rather than reacting impulsively. A regulated woman can openly admit that distance is painful without turning that admission into a demand, a threat, or a test. That ability to remain present with difficult emotions without allowing them to control every decision is one of the rarest and most attractive qualities anyone can develop, regardless of attachment style. The fourth invisible behavior is being endlessly available. At first, this may sound completely backward because most of us grow up believing that consistency and availability are signs of love, reliability, and commitment. In many healthy relationships, they absolutely are. However, within relationships involving an avoidant partner, unlimited availability can slowly reduce perceived value. This is not because availability is wrong, but because of how desire and human psychology naturally work. When you are always available, always ready to answer immediately, always adjusting your schedule around his, and always saying yes even when it costs you something important, the relationship gradually loses contrast. There is nothing left to anticipate, nothing left to appreciate, and very little space for natural desire to develop. Ironically, many avoidant people experience stronger curiosity and connection when there is a healthy amount of space between interactions. Constant availability removes that space completely, leaving very little opportunity for him to move toward you on his own. This is not about pretending to be busy, playing games, or deliberately making yourself difficult to reach. Those strategies eventually feel forced, and people usually recognize manipulation even if they cannot explain why. Instead, it is about genuinely building a full and meaningful life that naturally limits your availability. A woman with her own friendships, ambitions, responsibilities, interests, and personal goals is not difficult to reach because she is pretending to be unavailable. She is simply living a life that does not revolve entirely around waiting for someone else's attention. That quiet independence often becomes naturally attractive because it reflects genuine fulfillment rather than emotional dependence. A simple way to evaluate this is by asking yourself one honest question. If he did not text you at all this week, what would your week actually look like? If your plans, work, friendships, hobbies, and personal goals would continue exactly as they normally do, that is not emotional distance. It is emotional wholeness. But if your entire schedule quietly revolves around the possibility of hearing from him, that is worth noticing, not with self-criticism, but with honesty. Very often, that is exactly where your sense of value begins quietly slipping away. The fifth invisible behavior is trying to fix him. This behavior usually begins from an incredibly caring place, which is exactly why it is so difficult to recognize. You see the fear beneath his distance. You recognize the childhood wounds beneath his avoidance. You begin learning about attachment styles, emotional regulation, and nervous systems. Eventually, you start believing that if you simply understand him deeply enough, love him patiently enough, or explain his own behavior clearly enough, he will eventually heal and stop pulling away. But helping someone heal is not the same as loving them. An avoidant person often senses that difference even if neither of you ever says it aloud. The moment you stop becoming a partner and start becoming the manager of his emotional growth, the relationship quietly changes. Instead of feeling accepted, he begins feeling analyzed. Instead of feeling desired, he begins feeling studied. Ordinary conversations slowly begin sounding like therapy sessions. Gentle questions begin feeling like hidden evaluations. For an avoidant nervous system, very few experiences trigger retreat faster than feeling emotionally examined, rather than simply loved. There is an important distinction between supporting someone's growth and taking responsibility for it. A woman who believes she must fix him often loses herself in the process. Her attention becomes centered on his wounds, his healing, his fears, and his progress, while her own life gradually becomes smaller. A woman who accepts him exactly as he is while continuing to maintain healthy standards for herself communicates something very different. She allows him the opportunity to grow because he genuinely wants to, not because he feels pressured into changing simply to preserve the relationship. One useful way to notice this pattern is by paying attention to your conversations. Have most of your recent discussions focused on his attachment style, his childhood, his fears, and his emotional patterns? Or have they been about your own life, your own passions, your own goals and experiences that have nothing to do with the relationship? When nearly every conversation becomes centered around understanding or improving him, the relationship slowly becomes unbalanced. Your life quietly shrinks while his emotional journey becomes the center of everything. The sixth invisible behavior is abandoning yourself to keep the relationship. This is perhaps the quietest pattern of all because it develops so gradually that many people never notice it until much later. It begins with very small compromises. You stop mentioning certain boundaries because you do not want to appear difficult. You cancel plans with friends because he might finally decide to reach out. You slowly lower your expectations, convincing yourself that flexibility is simply part of being understanding. Without realizing it, the relationship becomes the center of your emotional world, while the parts of your life that once made you feel confident, interesting, and alive slowly fade into the background. Here is the painful paradox. The more you abandon yourself in order to keep an avoidant partner close, the less emotionally magnetic you often become. Real value has never been measured by how much you sacrifice, how much you shrink yourself, or how many compromises you quietly make. It comes from remaining fully yourself while loving another person. Even without consciously realizing it, many avoidant people are drawn toward partners who possess their own identity, their own purpose, their own friendships, and their own sense of direction. When your entire identity begins revolving around the relationship, there is less of your authentic self left for another person to admire, appreciate, or genuinely miss. Attraction that lasts is not built through endless sacrifice. It grows through identity. A woman who maintains her friendships, ambitions, boundaries, opinions, and personal goals throughout a relationship continues to feel interesting because she never stopped being herself. She is not trying to be chased. She simply refuses to disappear inside someone else's emotional world. If you speak with women who have eventually healed after relationships like this, many describe a similar realization. They often discover that the version of themselves they lost was not louder or more demanding than before. She had actually become quieter, smaller, and increasingly careful. She spent so much time trying not to trigger another emotional withdrawal that she gradually disconnected from herself long before her partner emotionally disconnected from the relationship. When you step back and look at these 6 patterns together, something important becomes clear. Chasing him when he withdraws. Over-explaining yourself whenever insecurity appears. Reacting emotionally to his silence instead of regulating through it. Being endlessly available while neglecting your own life. Trying to fix him instead of simply accepting who he currently is. And slowly abandoning yourself in order to preserve the relationship. None of these behaviors come from weakness. Every one of them comes from love, care, and the sincere desire to make the relationship succeed. That is exactly why they are so difficult to recognize while you are living through them. From the inside, these behaviors feel like devotion. Yet devotion offered to someone who cannot consistently receive it often creates distance instead of closeness. The relationship slowly loses emotional air without any dramatic ending because the pattern itself quietly keeps repeating. Perhaps the most encouraging truth is that none of these patterns are permanent. They are learned behaviors rather than permanent parts of your identity. What has been learned can also be unlearned. Real value has never depended on proving yourself worthy of someone else's attention. It has always come from remaining grounded, emotionally healthy, and authentically yourself regardless of another person's ability to stay close. An avoidant partner may never fully explain why he pulls away because he may not completely understand the fear beneath his own behavior. But you do not need that explanation to protect your own peace. You only need the willingness to recognize these patterns honestly without judging yourself and repeatedly choose your own emotional center instead of chasing someone else's. If even one of these 6 patterns felt deeply familiar, do not see that as failure. See it as awareness arriving at exactly the right time. Awareness is always the first step toward meaningful change. Before you leave, type the word value in the comments so this message can reach more women who need it today. And if this conversation helped you see your relationships more clearly, subscribe for more discussions that explore the psychology behind real relationships with honesty, depth, and practical understanding. Most importantly, continue protecting your peace without sacrificing your identity. Keep your friendships, keep your dreams, keep the version of yourself that existed long before this relationship began and will continue existing long after it, regardless of where life leads. That woman was never the problem. Remember this above everything else. The right relationship will never require you to disappear in order to be loved. Real love creates enough safety for you to remain completely yourself without editing, shrinking, or hiding any part of who you are. If someone can only stay close when you become quieter, smaller, or easier to manage, that is not genuine closeness. It is simply a cage with softer walls. Whatever happens next, carry this truth with you. Your value was never something you had to earn through waiting, sacrificing, shrinking, or proving yourself. It has always belonged to you. Sometimes the greatest lesson is simply remembering that it was there all along.